I mentioned in a recent video of mine that Riot's MMO has some amazing talent working on it, and it got me thinking, who else do we know that's working on the game? So I took a look. And for privacy reasons I should hope is obvious to everyone here, I will only look at the career histories and any public work that's out there on the internet. I'm not looking for scoops or secrets, I just want to bring these guys to the forefront and let you know why I think this game is in very safe hands. Now, I don't follow many people on LinkedIn, but Katya is one from a while back when I first started to learn how to 3D model and wasn't really using Twitter too much at the time. She would often post about her work on League of Legends, as well as some of her own passion projects, and in May of this year, she posted that she was moving over to the MMO team, and this was some very good news for us. Katya has worked on, in my opinion, some of the best skins for League of Legends, including the Cosmic and Dark Cosmic Lux, Spirit Blossom Ahri, Project Akali, Star Guardian Misfortune, Star Guardian Soraka, and a bunch more. Pulsefire Caitlyn as well is a particular favourite of mine. Before that, Katya worked at Blizzard and was responsible for some of the concept art that would later become the Legion artifact weapons, which were fantastic and some of the best artistic work that World of Warcraft has ever put out. I think so. Anyway, I spent so many hours farming those Legion artifact weapons and the skins you could get for them. It took me a very long time. But it was absolutely worth it, by the way, just so you know. She also posted a lot of fan art over the years showing a love for the fantasy genre and demonstrating that she's not limited to just creating League of Legends skins. Her Sketchfab account in particular is really interesting to look through, as she was creating high quality models for League characters as far back as 2016, and the detail in some of these original fan art projects is insanely impressive and a good sign of things to come for the MMO. Now, I must admit that Matt Tomaszkiewicz, I'm very sorry if I've butchered that pronunciation, Matt. Matt wasn't a name that I was familiar with before doing the research for this video, but it did turn out that I was very familiar with his work. I just hadn't realized it, and you guys are probably very familiar with his work as well. And that's because Matt spent 12 years working at CD Projekt Red as a quest designer on The Witcher 2, a lead quest designer on The Witcher 3, and a quest director on Cyberpunk 2077. But perhaps the most relevant role that he's done for this video is his role as principal narrative lead on Thronebreaker. Now, if you don't know what Thronebreaker is, it's essentially a single-player version of Gwent with a deep and complex story driving the drama behind the card battles that you play in that game. Now, in my original script, I went on for like 3 minutes about how good Thronebreaker is, but this video isn't about Thronebreaker, so I've had to take all of that out. All you need to know is that the overall story and dialogue in that game is every bit as good as The Witcher 3, with interesting characters and difficult decisions that really drive the drama in that game. It makes it a very great and very unique experience. I can't recommend that game enough if you're into card battle games. It's won awards for best story, best narrative, and best single-player game as well. And Matt was lead on all of that, even taking on the role of game director before moving over to Cyberpunk 2077 as the quest director I mentioned earlier. And while Cyberpunk 2077 did have, a few technical issues, the world building and narrative in that game is incredibly good, at least for the first 8 hours that I've played so far. We're super lucky to have Matt as the principal narrative designer, and if he can bring even half of the narrative quality of Thronebreaker and the Witcher series to the MMO, then I must say, we're all in for a fantastic ride. Xeno is a principal game designer on the MMO and joined the team back in March of last year after working as the design lead for the player immersion and expression team on League of Legends, or the PI team for short. They basically represent the player when it comes to the development of skins, in-game events, and things like that. Now, I was very close to not doing a section on Xeno for this video, purely because when I started writing this script, I considered the PI team to pretty much be the monetization team, something I don't like very much in my MMOs. But on doing the research for this video, I realized that the PI team are much more than just monetization, and I was being really unfair to them. I've come to believe, honestly, that Xeno, I think, is likely one of the most important people on this list for making sure that the game that we get is of high quality and not one that is pay to win. And that's because video games need to make money. They're not made for free, and like any other business, they have to turn a profit. That can result in games that often have very aggressive monetization strategies that fall into that pay-to-win camp, as I spoke about in a recent video of mine. Now, as much as we dislike these pay-to-win games as a community, they're often the smartest approach for a company to take, because only a very small amount of the player base needs to actually spend any money for it to become what is considered a commercial success, even if the vast majority of players hate it. Look at Diablo Immortal, for example. That game's taken in $1 million a day, and it received a 0.4 on Metacritic as one of the lowest scores in history. But what has that got to do with Xeno? Well, I found a job advert from around a year ago that listed 4 key responsibilities for a senior designer on the PI team with League of Legends. Now, one of those 4 responsibilities explicitly calls out that the job involves ensuring that the gameplay clarity of League is preserved and that no personalization product, which is a skin basically, is considered pay to win or pay to lose. Now, this is absolute music to my ears. I cannot express how important this is because it shows us what Riot, the Pi team, and Xeno thinks is important when it comes to the monetization of their game. That said, Riot is in new ground with their MMO and could easily fall into some of the play-to-win traps that we've seen before. But if Xeno is bringing this mindset over to the MMO, the one that they have in the Pi team, then I feel far more confident that Riot will avoid the live service pay-to-win or even pay-to-progress mistakes that we've seen in pretty much every MMO or live service game over the past 1.5 decades. Now, it does mean that we might get some of the other monetization stuff that I'm not a huge fan of, such as very expensive cosmetics. But that's pretty much the best you can ask for with a free-to-play game. I talk more about this in my monetization video if you're interested. Animation can pretty much make or break a game for me, and I know that's sort of shallow, but if a game looks stiff or clunky, then it kind of takes me out of that experience. I've tried a bunch of MMOs in my time, and I always find myself back on World of Warcraft, and I think a large part of that is just down to the fact that the movement and animations in that game make the moment-to-moment gameplay just feel super good. And it's for that reason that I'm beyond excited to have Mike Higgins working on Riot's MMO. And that's because he's worked on a few things you may have heard of, such as Mass Effect, Wildstar, League of Legends, Heroes of the Storm, an unannounced project at Blizzard, which is interesting, and perhaps the most exciting of all, The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron on Nickelodeon. Now, all of these, and yes, I include Jimmy Neutron in this, had exceptional animation for their time, and a lot of the work that Mike has done in video gaming still stands up today as excellent quality animation that brings the characters to life. He even managed to take this really boring probe from StarCraft 3 and turn it into this incredibly cute little character from Heroes of the Storm. Also buff Tychus, not sure how I feel about that one. Perhaps the most interesting work that Mike has done is his animation work on Wildstar. That game had some faults, but animation certainly wasn't one of them, and one of the reasons I played Wildstar as much as I did, despite the pretty boring leveling process, server issues, and dead realms and all of that stuff, the character animations and movement was so full of character and felt so smooth that I was willing to fight through some of the issues that game had just to see my duo waddle around on my screen for a few more hours. Moment-to-moment movement and the animations that you get from second to second are so important, at least I think so, that I'm very pleased to have Mike on the team. I cannot wait to see what he does with the Yordles. I know he's going to do great work with those. Candace has worked in game design for around 15 years and is currently a lead game designer on Riot's MMO. She's worked on Lord of the Rings Online, World of Warcraft, StarCraft 2, and Diablo 4, making her resume quite impressive. Now, she seems to be pretty skilled at a bunch of different things like world design, quality assurance, leadership, combat systems, but most importantly for today, which is what I want to talk about, is boss encounters. Candace worked on several encounters during Mists of Pandaria, Warlords of Draenor, Legion, and Battle for Azeroth. And for anyone who hasn't played World of Warcraft, it's around Warlords of Draenor that I really started to notice the quality in dungeons really ramp up, with a lot of the encounters or boss fights becoming super interesting, with really strong and creative themes that just made the fights a lot more fun. Now, we don't know what exact fights Candace worked on, but we do know that she worked on the Nazul boss fight in the Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, which is one of the coolest dungeon encounters of that expansion, at least in my opinion. It had this big row of skeletons that would run across the wave, and you would have to kill one of the things in the middle to get through a gap before it would murder you. So it was a frantic rush, at least early on in the expansion when you didn't have any equipment. So I'm pleased that someone with that level of creativity, someone that can bring this sort of stress to me as a player when I'm killing bosses, is on the team. I'm very, very excited. It's a good sign to come for any of us who do like that dungeon and do like that raid content in their MMOs, which, if you can't tell already, is what I'm all about. I love raiding, I love dungeons, so I'm very, very excited. Mark Yetter is the game director for Riot's MMO and joined the team 8 years after leading gameplay design on League of Legends, both as a director and a game designer. Prior to Riot Games, he worked on balancing for first-person shooters, with special mention for the reward system design and weapon balancing in Black Ops 2 multiplayer, and a game called Section 8 Prejudice all the way back in 2011. What's actually quite funny about Mark's story is that he was actually meant to only be on the League of Legends team for just a few months before moving on to new R&D projects for Riot, but he quickly found himself being offered a spot leading a dedicated champion update team, which at the time didn't exist, and their purpose was to rework many old League champions and make them viable in the game, as many of them had been left behind in the early years of League development, whilst Riot focused on creating new champions like Thresh, who was brand new at the time. Now, as the years passed, the scope of Mark's team increased, and it doubled in size in just under 3 years and had taken on even more work, including complete champion overhauls, which is only really a few steps away from creating new champions entirely. Now, today, the game is in a far better place in terms of balance than it was in 2013 when Mark joined, which, oddly enough, is when I first started playing League at university. And let me tell you, the balancing was a mess back then. It was carnage, and it's in a much better place today. I think Mark and his team has done a fantastic job over the past 8 or so years that they've been doing this. So why is this important for an MMO anyway? Well, if you don't know, a lot of MMO gamers, especially in World of Warcraft, are obsessed with class balance and performance. And this is in part because of how important class performance is when it comes to the more difficult content such as raids, dungeons, and of course PvP. My favourite class in WoW is a sub-rogue, but they were the worst performing class in the Castle Nafria raid, so I ended up switching to Marksman Hunter so I could do more damage. Now in the next raid, that was flipped on its head, with sub-rogue becoming the best performing class and Marksman Hunter being near the bottom. This is really frustrating if you like to play one particular class and you don't want to flip-flop all the time, because it means that you kind of get left behind just for playing the thing that you want to play. And having someone like Mark on the team who is focused on balance hopefully means we get less of that in Riot's MMO, and we can all play the classes that we want to play without fear of being ostracized by the community for playing a dead spec or something like that. He's also clearly just a really smart and thoughtful guy. There's a podcast from 2016 that I listened to for this video, and he comes across as really in tune with what's important for creating a team, a good team, and what's important for creating a good game that players want to play. I must admit, when I first saw that he was the director, I thought, oh, that's a bit of a weird choice, because League of Legends and MMOs, they're not very similar in that respect in terms of what the game design is. But after listening to him on that podcast and doing a bit more research, I must say I'm far more confident in Mark now that I've done the research. I truly believe that this guy is going to do a fantastic job. And last, and certainly not least, there's Greg Street, who I think most people are familiar with at this point. He's known as Ghost Crawler on Twitter. Now, Greg is the executive producer for Riot's MMO, and I can't really say anything here that hasn't been said already by many others. Greg is the man that most people are excited about having on the MMO team, and I don't think this is just because of his impressive track record, which we will get onto in just a moment, but I also think it's because of the way that he interacts with fans online. He comes across as incredibly down-to-earth, passionate, and perhaps most commendable of all, he comes across as honest. Now, this sort of openness does a lot to build trust, and does wonders for creating teams that perform well, which as executive producer, or any leader really, is exactly what your job is to do. To talk about myself for a moment, I look after roughly 10 people in my real life job, and whilst I can hand on heart say that being open and honest with people in your charge is one of the most valuable things you can bring to them as a leader, it also opens you up to a degree of personal risk, as many outside the team can view that honesty as weakness and use it against you. Office politics is a horrible thing. But Greg does this anyway, and he does it on Twitter no less, and it takes a lot of emotional intelligence and resilience to be as consistently open and honest as Greg shows himself to be. I think a lot of people take this for granted, but I have a lot of respect for Greg simply on this basis alone. But let's talk about hard skills and experience. Greg is no stranger to making MMOs, as he led roughly half the World of Warcraft design team, working on classes, items, professions, combat, PvP, encounters, and major feature design such as the scenarios in Myths or flying in Wrath of the Lich King, which, by the way, was WoW's highest point in history when it came to subscriber numbers. Prior to that, he worked on the Age of Empires series, and before that, he worked with crabs. No, really, he's really passionate about it. And oheyspun has a video really deep diving into Ghost Crawler's history. If you really want to find out more about him, I found out that his name was Death Shrimp or something like that, like a while back from that video, which is very funny. But for this video, I wanted to highlight that Greg has a lot of experience leading teams on very successful IPs. It could be luck, of course, but seeing what his staff say about him and how he interacts with his fans online, I would struggle to believe that some skill didn't play a part in Greg's success to date. So that's it. That's just some of the people that we know to be working on the MMO across the spectrum of design, management, art, and story. And it's easy to look at these guys and say that we have a world-class team, because we really do. These guys are exceptionally talented. This is, no doubt about it, a world-class team. But that doesn't guarantee success. If we cast our eyes back to 2014, when another highly anticipated MMO called Wildstar was released, they had people like Corey Loftus, Tim Kaine, and Jeremy Gaffney, all developers of note in some way or another, working on that game. And whilst the launch was strong, it had a very good first year, that strength didn't last, and the game was closed out in 2018, I think it was. nerdSlayer has a pretty good video covering some of the decisions by Carbine on what likely led to the downfall of Wildstar. I'll put a link in the description, you can check that out. So anyway, that's all for this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the team that Riot have put together so far. If you disagree with anything that I've said, then I'd like to hear about it as well, because that's how I improve and that's how I get better. So if you want to criticize me, go for it. I'm all for it. I'll respond to every single one in the comments. If you just want to hang out though and chat about MMO stuff or League of Legends, then I've set up a Discord where you can go and do exactly that. There is a link in the description below. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.